Chris, I want to start with you, but before we talk about the movie, I want to ask you about your folks. I want to ask about your mom and dad and how they factored into the story, what they meant to you about why the story had to be told.
Well, my dad was a German Jewish refugee. He was born in Berlin in 1923, left the country in 1933, eventually emigrated to America and joined the U.S. Army, went into the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA, and did undercover work because his German was perfect, and he looked Aryan, and he did various things at the end of the war undercover. And afterwards, he, as a kind of a second job, he wrote biographies of prominent Nazi Party officials, and I was his kind of helper. So I grew up with all of these issues floating around my head. And my mom was an actor. She was nominated for the Academy Award, for the Best Supporting Actress Academy Award in 1959 for Imitation of Life, which is in this film.
It happens to be at the theater, and that theater is in the film where they actually went, where the real...
We shot at the real theater where Klaus Eichmann and Sylvia Herrmann met, the York Theater in Olivos in Buenos Aires. And the Imitation of Life was not playing.
That'd be too strange.
Yeah, artistic license, but I thought my mom's role of and a girl passing as white really suited this situation.
I'm going to ask you, Brian, about how this script came your way. Who had written it, and what was it primarily interested in at the first time that you came across the story?
What was that? Well,
the first time you came across the script.
Yeah, sure. A young writer, a young sort of unknown writer out of the UK named Matt Orton, who was 26 and had written a couple other scripts, but had certainly had nothing produced up until now. And Fred and I read it and flipped out for it, both to sort of the level of historical fact. We had a long conversation with him about what was true and untrue and how he'd gone to Israel and researched it for a number of months. And then MGM was reading it sort of simultaneously to us, and we all collectively fell in love with it, and MGM made an offer immediately, and we were off to the races.
How did the casting come together, guys?
Well, honestly, we went straight to Chris, and Chris said yes, and then we went out to Oscar. So it's a weird one because there's so many times when there are all these bumps in the road, but this was one of these things that everybody that we talked to was profoundly passionate about and came on pretty quickly too.
When you are starting to look at the stories that are told around this, there are different people who have written about their recollections, and some of those recollections are at odds with each other. So how do you figure out what is the core of the truth? I mean, this is not quite Rashomon, but people have different memories of specific incidents. So how do you figure out what is the story and how truthful you're going to be to what you believe the consensus of facts point toward?
I think we tried to be as accurate as possible, and we had various people keeping us honest, not the least an ex-Mossad agent called Avner Abraham, who is the kind of world expert on the mission and who mounted the exhibition that's currently touring the world about Operation Finale. That being said, people remember things differently, and there are several memoirs which are mutually contradictory. Unsurprisingly, each agent felt that he was the hero of the mission. Peter Malkin was in many ways the most interesting of these guys, and reported having had these kind of strange, intimate conversations with Eichmann in the safe house. So that was kind of the heart of, I think, Matt's script, and I think the most appealing thing for Oscar to perform. Every detail in the movie has been vetted in one way or another. So we extrapolated certain things, we juxtaposed things, we moved things forward in time, but it is an incredibly well-informed picture of what happened. Inevitably, making a 2-hour version of any series of events amounts to a taking artistic license, but we were pretty careful about what we put in.
On a production side, when you figure out that you want to and should be shooting in Argentina, what are the obstacles to doing that? And is it worth noting that there are probably still some people in Argentina whose loyalties are maybe leaning more toward Eichmann than they are toward Israel?
And here in the U.S. too, probably.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
As I think many people in this room probably can relate to, anytime you have a script that's set in a foreign country, there's someone who holds the purse strings telling you to shoot anywhere but that place. So we were told that Budapest would be a great place to make this movie, or Vancouver, and it just on paper never makes sense to shoot where the story's set. And as producers and filmmakers, it is always the best choice, and we are pretty good at fighting that fight. And to everyone's credit, MGM's is not, most studios are not looking for period spy dramas, so they were incredibly emotionally invested in this story and wanting to tell it authentically. And as soon as it became our responsibility to make the numbers work, they supported that decision 100%. And I think you probably felt in the movie, even though there's a lot of interior conversations, that specificity of place and time is reflected so powerfully and viscerally in the movie, and I think it just adds a character to the film that's unreplaceable.
Jason, how much reference is there for physical locations, for what the houses look like, and maybe what Oscar and Ben were able to use in terms of how these people spoke and what they sounded like, how they behaved?
I know Oscar used Peter Malkin's book quite a bit as reference for his character and the conversations Chris spoke about. Our production designer did an amazing job building the house on Garibaldi Street, and finding all these other locations where our location scouts were, amazing. We shot the movie in Patagonia up in Bariloche. We did all the Austria stuff up there, and we shot all throughout the city. The house was an hour and a half outside, where we had to schlep every day for weeks.
Yeah, there was every reason, kind of financially, to build the interrogation room and parts of the safe house in a studio, but we found a house that felt very much like what we knew about the original safe house, and we figured out that we could still shoot in sequence within that house, so that sometimes, there were lighting arrangements that were left in place so that big lights didn't have to be humped up and down stairs, but the crew had to move a lot of heavy equipment up and down stairs in order to shoot it in sequence. So I thought that was worth doing.
I think also there's some really creepy real things that happened while we were shooting. The night of the capture, that lightning and thunder was actually happening at that moment, and it was a very bizarre night. To watch all that.
Eichmann himself said a couple of obviously very contradictory things about himself and about the role he played in the war. Toward the end of the war, Eichmann said, and I'm quoting him now, would leap laughing into the grave because the feeling that he had 5 million people on his conscience would be for him a source of extraordinary satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And yet, when he was captured and when he was seeking clemency, he said, there's a need to draw a line between the leaders responsible and the people like me forced to serve as mere instruments in the hands of the leader. I was not a responsible leader, and as such, do not feel myself guilty.
Yeah.
That's a lot to play as an actor. So in your conversations with Ben, what were the things you kept coming back to in terms of the honesty and deceit that Eichmann told himself?
Well, I think we had some important early conversations in which we established that we both felt that he should not be in any way a stock villain or some kind of notion of the embodiment of evil. Part of that was deciding not to have him do an accent, which was actually true across the board. I just wanted people to speak the way that they spoke. I didn't want any scrim between the audience and him, and I think that he felt that he would be a more threatening figure if it weren't so easy to place him on the shelf as a villain, that there would be moments in which you might strangely be drawn to him or feel sympathy for him. And I think the scary thing about Eichmann is that as well as doing all the terrible things that he did, he loved his children. He was a family man. And I think that if you're able to recognize that about him, you can understand how it is possible for people around us, even for ourselves, to commit horrible crimes under the right circumstances.
Fred, Jason, Brian, Chris, thank you so much for coming, and thank you guys for spending your time with us.